Welcome back to another episode of Get Your Popcorn. We are joined again by my dad, Mike Moroz. This week we are kicking off our Summer of Speilberg. On Thursday we released a bonus episode for Catch Me If You Can with another special guest, Brooklyn Melson, and then today is our regular scheduled episode on Sunday evening with Jaws. And for the listeners that don't know, Jaws is a 1975 horror movie based on the 1973 a novel directed by Steven Spielberg. It's sort of his first big budget film. It had quite the chaotic production, but ended up being one of the best movies of all time, according to the American Film Institute. It's been preserved by the National Library of Congress for its impact. It's also widely considered to be the first ever blockbuster film due to its many, many delays in production. It was supposed to come out at Christmas time, which is where all the big budget movies were released at the time. Still, we're seeing that for Oscar bait, but we're seeing some of these like big concept films move to the summer, and that's because of Jaws and its release schedule. So, Dad, do you want to talk about your particular relationship with Jaws?
When the movie came out, I was very excited to see it. A little bit terrifying, of course. I had to talk my parents into allowing me to go to the theater locally, and I won that argument. And it scared the living hell out of me for a long time, which of course gave my mother no end of delight because she told me not to go. So, being that horrified by the movie was vindication for her. But it was, one of the first times I felt truly terrified during the course of the film itself. It was awesome.
Yeah, for me, it's like Jaws is because it's so iconic by the time I was around in like the 90s, the early 2000s. It was like, hey, we've had a million like Jaws wannabe films, a lot of B horror movies that were released, and then things like The Simpsons and Family Guy, and even things like Scooby-Doo have all referenced it. So it was like baked into before I even saw Jaws. I like knew so many things from Jaws, or so many, like the quote, "We're going to need a bigger boat," I think is baked into so many things. And even just saying like, "We're going to need a bigger this."
Yeah.
Well, like for me, like I have like a perpetual fear of water. Like I don't swim really to this day from watching it. But even the poster, like the second, like, cause I do like, wow, well, not as much anymore, but like, 9 to 6 years ago, really, I was wake surfing like all the time. And the second I hit the water, that poster was like in my head where I'm like, I'm going to die in this lake from a shark. I read a thing when I was younger about sharks that swam. I think it was in like maybe Louisiana or something, or New Orleans, or I don't know, Florida. One of those states. It was sharks that had swum up the river.
Not Vancouver Island.
No, but I did learn through Owen, my husband, for listeners, that we do have great whites in our waters that I didn't know about. And he has accidentally caught blue sharks while fishing for salmon. Yeah, this is horrifying.
Okay, duly noted.
So I don't swim, and I think it is a direct correlation from Jaws and a mass hysteria, which I think has been talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Within like, especially marine biologists and stuff, this like negative perpetual like view of sharks because of the film.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, there'd be no Shark Week without Jaws.
No, absolutely not. And this like endless cultural fascination, which is like directly related to this film.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, it's very scary. So interestingly enough, Steven Spielberg, in the beginning of his direction career, was working for Universal Pictures with these two producers and was in a meeting for another film when he saw a copy of the kind of drafts or manuscripts of the novel and was very interested in doing it and sort of pitched himself as a director. And then tried to back out of it later because he was worried that he was going to be like the popcorn movie guy and would be like painted into this box of like he can only direct these types of films, which I honestly do think he was put into for a while.
He was so good at it, though. I mean, the whole structure of the film, the way he treated both the shark itself and the various characters. The film is more than just the shark. There's so much more going on in the film as you look at the personalities of the core characters. The summer blockbuster piece of it, I can certainly see how that would worry him. But the feel of the film is so much deeper than just that we're here to make a bunch of money in the summertime. That he certainly was able to avoid that label.
Well, when I rewatched it, 'cause I've seen the film like a number of times, but when I rewatched it with Owen the other night, we were both talking about like this is undeniably a Spielberg film because of that. Like there are moments of the like swell of the heartful music and that there is like so much like heart. And I do think that his films, all of them have this like a little bit of blinding positivity at some point in the film that is like, I don't know, like, or this charm that I think is like, I don't know, I consider it to be like Sound of Music-esque. Like there's always like a little moment of like that. Because I do think the core of his direction does come from like such a love of film and characters.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that cuts through. I think that cuts through everything. It all comes down to story and characters, right? And he's so good at ensuring that there are rich characters. All of the characters are rich and detailed and have compelling backstories. I mean, it's one of the things that I love about really every film that he's got.
Well, one of the things when I was talking, I don't know if you've listened to my episode with Harry Marks, who's like my favorite content creator around film. And he was talking about, and I think it's very true, is like Spielberg is part of the generation of our like Martin Scorsese's and Francis Ford Coppola and people who, the first generation of directors who grew up watching like talkies and film. And you can tell that he's taken some of the best examples of the directors before him and incorporated into his films, like Frank Capra or George Cukor. And like you can see those influences in his films and being like somebody who very clearly grew up and was like the first generation to be like, this is possible for me to do. Like I can do this.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, a lot of them went to film school too, right? So it's one of the cutting edge of the group that.
Don't think he did. I think he didn't, like he was like rejected by a number of them.
You could be right.
I'm pretty sure. I'll look it up right now, but I'm pretty sure Spielberg really wanted to, but he was rejected by a number of like film schools, and I think he was the only one of that. Like I think they were called the Brat Pack.
Get better guess. If I'm wrong, you're gonna need to vet your guess before you let
I
them
know
on.
I'm doing that right now. I'm fact check myself. After taking a tour bus to Universal Studios and had a chance conversation with a director, he got a 3-day pass on the premises. On the 4th day, he walked to the studio gates without a pass, and the security guard waved him in. I basically spent the next 2 months at Universal Studios, and somehow I became an unofficial apprentice.
Fantastic. So correct. You were right.
He applied to the University of Southern California's film school, but was turned down because of mediocre grades. He then applied to California State University in Long Beach, and then Universal Studios gave him the opportunity to write and direct a short film.
Oh, brilliant.
So I did know that he was rejected by, I don't know what university I just said, but that one.
Yeah. Better vetting. Yes.
Mom brain.
Better vetting of your guess.
Yeah, I needed to, but I was pretty sure he was the only one of that group that didn't go to film school.
Okay. Well, there we go. He understands Hollywood in a way that very few other directors certainly do. His own innate sensibilities about how to structure a story, how to develop those characters are just undeniable. And you can, film comes on, even if you don't know it's a Spielberg film, you're gonna understand that it is fairly quickly.
And even as a producer, like some of the things that he does, like things like Gremlins, you're like, oh yeah, like this still has that feel to it. Or some of the DreamWorks productions, you're like, this clearly has like its Spielberg influence on it.
For sure.
And I think that's what's given him such a lasting career. And like, I do like his more serious films, but like my favorites are these like more heartfelt, like Jaws isn't necessarily, it's not I mean, you considered it to be a family film, but
Yeah. Again.
things like
My apologies.
Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park that are more like PG-13.
Right.
Like, yeah, you can go and see this with your like preteen.
Yeah.
If you're, like a cool parent.
Yeah, for
Are
sure.
his, like strongest.
For sure.
Yeah, between that and the Temple of Doom, where they're trying to rip out his heart, I was like pretty deeply traumatized. That also might be where my fear of snakes comes from. Just them like that pouring onto the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they set the initial budget for this film at $3.5 million and the shooting schedule over 55 days. But it ended up being a budget of $9 million due to $4 million of mechanical issues and shot over 159 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Substantial difference. Substantial difference.
And most of these were a lot of it was due to Spielberg's, he states now his immaturity as a director, but his insistence on shooting on open.
Yeah. Yeah. And the consequence was a lot of the cast was seasick for a percentage of the time, and I understand, when Costner made Waterworld, that he advised him not to do it on open water, that he expressed his disappointment that he hadn't shot Jaws, in a studio in a tank rather than open water, and Costner didn't listen. So what made the film bad, but
Do you think that that contributed to like a lot of along with Costner's affair with the woman before his divorce was announced, but a lot of the negative hype around Waterworld that helped build it up as this huge expensive project that's taking forever and delays and delays and delays. And I do think that that already had like a negative view for audiences and critics just with
that's possible for sure.
it's not great, but you haven't been to Universal Studios, and I have, and the Waterworld live show is spectacular. It's been running for like 30 years or something.
Okay. Well, there you go.
And actually, the Universal Studios is like full of Spielberg stuff, and you get to actually go and see, like, you drive past the like Jaws mechanical stuff, and even when you're waiting in line, they've got like the upside down Jaws thing that you can like stick your head into. It's very cool.
Awesome.
And the Jurassic Park ride as well, which is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So the film was shot, like we said, on open ocean, shot off Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts to make sure that it had like an East Coast feel to it. And 3 specific mechanical sharks were created. 1, the whole body, 2 for the right-hand side shots, and another one for the left-hand shots. They were all called Bruce. Which is where the Finding Nemo great white shark was named after. Again, it's like another reference to the film.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like an insider's reference.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
And they had 2 of Quint's boats that were built. One was functional, and then one was used that they could sink on command. And like we said, they shot on open ocean, which was the first time a major studio had ever done that. So things like Meet Me on the Bounty and stuff were all done in front of, created sets or backlit shots.
Yeah. 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 Certainly brave approach to it, right? Very, innovative in a sense to try and do it on open water. You get that sense of realism and additional danger, right? From being on the ocean itself.
And I think it's part of the reason that the film hasn't aged poorly is I think, when using either practical effects or practical sets, because you're not having like dated green screening in the background like you see with like Superman and some of this other stuff. And actually stuff that he used in Jurassic Park, it's why it's held up with, is using practical effects. So because you're seeing the water, the only thing that looks kind of dated is the quality of the color in the camera as opposed to like the sets as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. There's some interesting aspects of the casting of the film as well that I was just fascinated by. As much as the cast itself is awesome, some of the people who wound up not being in the film I found really kind of fascinating. The role of Quint, for instance, was offered to Lee Marvin and Sterling Hayden, neither of whom wanted it and turned it down.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that sort of thing fascinating. And Heston was very interested in the role of Brody. I can't imagine him as Brody, but small town sheriff. The idea of him in that role just absolutely throws me. But it's fast.
I think that Heston doesn't have like the vulnerability. Like you kind of get that Roy Schneider's over his head, and like maybe he isn't necessarily the best guy to be leading. Where I think with some of those like more epic films that Heston did, and then his eventual descent into crazy NRA territory, like he's very like outspoken, and he'd be less believable to like be pushed aside by the mayor.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's true, right? That his size of his screen presence was just bigger than the role.
Another cool fact just about some of the shots that we were talking about was the real life sharks were shot and filmed in Australia. They went down to film great whites. So a lot of the cut shots at the end down in the cage were a an actual great white shark going up to a cage. And they had to rework the script because in the book, Hooper dies in the cage. But because they got this like amazing footage of the great white attacking the cage that's very clearly empty, they had to rework the script so that he lived and escaped because Spielberg wanted to use that footage so badly.
Right, right. Yeah, that's amongst the most terrifying sequences in the movie.
And you can tell very quickly, like, because of the like fluid motion, that it is a real shark.
Yeah.
And actually, the studio wanted to use trained great whites to start out with, which is insanity.
Yeah, that's absolutely bizarre that they would even contemplate that.
Yeah. I mean, this is, at a time where I think, oh God, what's that film that Tippi Hedren was shooting, where she just like lived with cats. So I think it was a different time. So this film was the highest grossing film at the time of release, adjusted for inflation. Still nothing has beaten Gone with the Wind, which I think has made $4.5 billion in today's money, where this made $1.5 billion adjusted for today's inflation, but it made $260 million on a $9 million budget.
Not a bad return.
No. It's got a score on Rotten Tomatoes of 97%. Of course, Rotten Tomatoes, because new critics add their pieces, is a little bit skewed to initial release. It's got a Letterboxd score of 3.9. I gave it a 4.5, with my review being, I am in fact permanently afraid to get back in the water. Roger Ebert said at the time, Steven Spielberg's Jaws is a sensationally effective action picture, a scary thriller that works all the better because it's populated with characters that have been developed into human beings we get to know and care about. It's a film that's frightening as The Exorcist, and yet it's nicer kind of fright and somehow more fun because we're scared by an outdoor adventure saga instead of by a brimstone and vomit devil.
And I think that's really true. It's the idea of the thing that we're afraid of is always way scarier than the reality of it. Other than, of course, the live sharks attacking the cage, which were just as scary as the idea.
But I think that's where the mechanical errors benefited, is because out of necessity, they couldn't shoot the shark. And so you get more of a suspense thriller and using a lot of those like POV shots of the shark swimming under people's legs.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, which is just so terrifying, so anxiety driving.
And so for the Academy Award nominations, it was nominated for Best Picture, and this is a pretty stacked year. It was nominated alongside One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Barry Lyndon, Dog Day Afternoon, and Nashville.
Yeah.
It was nominated for Original Score, Film Editing, and Best Sound, and it won Original Score, which Steven Spielberg actually gives credit to. He said the film wouldn't be half as good without the score.
Yeah, and I think that's really true.
Best Editing, which again, like the cuts between mechanical shark and the real life shark, I think are pretty seamless. And Best Sound. And it lost Best Picture to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And in my opinion, it should have lost Best Picture to Dog Day Afternoon.
Either way.
Have you seen it? Doesn't hold up as well, I think.
Well, I mean, at the time, they were both like just so profoundly different, so cutting edge, at least from my perspective. They were just, that's an amazing lineup of films to be nominated from top to bottom for Best Picture.
Dog Day Afternoon's better, though.
Okay.
It is.
That's another podcast.
Don't worry, we'll get there. All Al Pacino's films will be done eventually. And changes it caused in the film industry is this was one of the first films to do a wide release rather than a staggered. There was a huge media campaign done, especially on television, to hype up the film.
Yeah.
It realized that if the studio spent a ton of money on advertising, they would get a lot of payoff in the back end, which we are seeing a lot more now.
Yeah. And it was exactly that television advertising that got me hooked on the idea that I need to go see this movie. Thank God my grandparents lived a block from the movie theater.
Okay, so we've got Roy Schneider as Chief Martin Brody. We've got Robert Shaw as Quint. He's the shark hunter. We've got Richard Dreyfuss as Matt Hooper. Lorraine Gray as Ellen Brody, Chief Brody's wife, who Quint's initially enough in the book, her and Hooper have an affair, but Spielberg cut that out of the script. We have Murray Hamilton as Mary Larry Vaughn. We have Carl Gottlieb as Meadows, and he was one of the writers on the screenplay. We have Jeffrey Kramer as the deputy. We have Susan Backline as Chrissy, who is the first death we see in the film. And we have Lee Fierro as Mrs. Kittner, and Peter Benchley as the interviewer, who is the author of the book.
Just some great characters in the film. I just am so particularly as I look at the list of folks who didn't get cast, and trying to imagine them replacing the people that I saw in the film. For me, it's almost inconceivable. I mean, you look at Robert Shaw as Quint. Like any other of the names, they'd have been okay. They'd have had their own style to it. But Shaw is just so perfect as Quint, that grizzled old fisherman. I mean, he's just amazing.
So we start in the New England beach town of Amity Island. A young woman goes swimming late night. Those are the opening shots. We see her and her boyfriend sort of running down the beach, clearly drunk after a party. He passes out and she dives in, and we just see like an unknown thing pulling her down.
I knew I was in for a fear ride at that point, obviously, and spent the rest of the movie, or most of the rest of the movie, just gripping the seat of my chair in anticipation.
And this was done by attaching a harness that they then like manually broke her down, like broke her through the surface of the water. And she said it was so painful that some of those screams were just from the pain. There was a rumor that she dislocated her hip, but she denied that later. She said that was just a sensationalized version, but it did hurt quite badly to be yanked under the water.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
Chief Martin Brody is then notified by the boyfriend who files a missing persons report. And he seems like pretty chill about the missing girlfriend, in my opinion. The boyfriend was like relatively relaxed. Even when they do find her remains on the beach, he does not have the same reaction that I would hope a boyfriend would.
Well, I mean, yeah.
He's like, this is terrible. Anyway, I did report it though.
Yeah, it's
Did you kill her?
you sort of wonder a little bit whether it's just so out there, whether in fact, maybe, to give the guy some credit, he's not just overcome with the moment. It's just too bizarre, too terrifying to do anything other than be numb to. Can we go with that? Or is he just callous?
I kind of think he sucks.
Okay.
So the coroner then concludes that it was a shark attack, and the police chief, Martin Brody, closes the beach, but the mayor, Larry Vaughn, he tells him to reconsider because he's primarily concerned with the summer economy boom that the beach town has, despite the fact that there are Boy Scouts that are due to be having a swim meet that day, where in the same location that this woman was just killed by a shark.
It's interesting, as you do a little bit of reading about sort of the critiques of Jaws, the whole concept that there's a layer of, capitalism, a criticism of capitalism that plays out a little bit in the film is kind of intriguing. And I can't quite decide whether to pay attention to that sort of analysis or whether this is just a great summer fear popcorn eating movie.
Well, I think it does have something to say, and I think it goes against the delusion that films have gone woke. I kind of think they always have been, particularly because they're created by artsy people. But what it reminded me the most was in COVID, when we had a lot of discussion about what was the right way to handle that, whether or not we should open the floodgates that we saw in some of the red states, or we should lock it down and do we value whether or not people are going to get sick, whether or not they're the vulnerable population or not? Or do we want to ensure that businesses are able to stay open? And what is the right call? Because, businesses are, a lot of small businesses in particular are people's like livelihoods. But, do we need to keep a big box store like Walmart making as much money as possible at the detriment of, immune compromised people?
Right.
And that's what I kept thinking of. I'm like, wow, this is like really, really relevant to now. Or not now, but 5 years ago. The coroner is then kind of under pressure from the mayor, and now kind of agrees with the mayor that this could have just been like a tragic accident and not a shark. And then Brody, also then feeling that pressure, accepts the theory and then opens the beach with additional security. I think. But then we cut to Brody and his wife sitting at the beach. It's very crowded. They've got the extra security, and we see a boy, Alex Kittner, paddle out into the water, and we see various shots of Brody where there are things that could be shark attacks that are just happen to be people splashing or people screaming or like a boogie board. Or
one of the things I think that's really fascinating about this initial sequence as well is that Brody's got a fear of the water himself, and I think that's in this context is a really interesting character add to the story. He's trying to save the community, protect the community from the potential of there being a shark there, and he's having to overcome his own kind of issues in order to do that. And it's one of the we come back to the idea that Spielberg was at first afraid to do the film for fear of becoming locked into um, a particular have people having a particular view of him as a director. And I think this is exactly one of the points uh, where his own intuition, his own sense of things, sense of story and character allows him to break free of that kind of thing, where he imbues it with a humanness that just supersedes some of the other stuff. The idea that the guy in charge of protecting everybody is afraid to go in the water
Mhm.
is brilliant.
And I think to add to that, when we do see the beginning of the attack of the boy Alex, the shot where Brody realizes it, and this is where we see Spielberg being a student of film, is the same shot, like the way the camera dolly works, as in Vertigo,
Hmm.
referencing those suspenseful movies that he would have grown up on.
Yeah, exactly.
Alex is then killed. We see the blood in the water. Spielberg was very clear with the costume department that no one was to be in red, so that the really stark contrast of the only time you see red is when the water is filled with blood. A $3,000 bounty is then placed on the shark. They hold a press conference where Chief Brody announces he is now closing the beaches, but the mayor again walks it back, saying it'll only be for 24 hours. This is where we meet Quint, a local shark hunter who sort of pitches his services for $10,000.
And this has to be the best character introduction, or one of the best in movies. Just the fingernails on the chalkboard. It still makes my skin crawl.
We then cut to Brody at home, where we see his son sitting in his new birthday present, which is a boat. He gets very upset and sort of pulls his kid out. And his wife initially was like, oh, it's fine. And then sort of comes across him that this is way more serious than the local media is presenting.
Mm.
We then see two men set up a trap for the shark off the dock with that guy's all the contents of his meat freezer. The shark bites the bait. The dock is broken, and we hear the music, so we know that it's the shark. While one of the men desperately swims back to shore, but it is. He is safe. We then meet Matt Hooper, who examines the girl's remains. He's an oceanographer, and confirming that she was killed by a large shark, that this wasn't a tragic accident.
Yeah, and I have to say that the Richard Dreyfuss in that role as well is just absolutely perfect. Thinking about other people who might have been considered, but he's just so perfect in that role. Just a little bit smug, in his sense of things. Really can't imagine anyone else at this point having done as well.
Well, he's so deeply unlikable, I think. And it is unlikable for, again, later when he is compared to Quint. I think when we see people that come from this, crazy level of privilege, it's very clear that his family has a lot of money. They've paid for him to do all these things and have all luxury equipment. And, I think when we see this, particularly, new generation of people that have grown up with this either luxury or technological advancements that are immediately dismissive of kind of grit and experience and that working class knowledge that I think you don't get if you don't grow up with some sort of economic hardship.
Yeah. And to have the three of them too, I mean, three very different versions of masculinity in that, pursuit of the shark as well. I mean, kind of the anxious, highly moral police chief, the educated, elitist oceanographer, and then Quint, the grizzled old kind of hyper masculine male, all with their own approaches to, how to do this, and all having to work together in order to achieve the objective. It's really kind of fascinating to put them all together in the same confined space.
But I think for me, Quint is where I have sort of the soft spot and why I sympathize with his character a lot more, because growing up in this small town, I'm I know 50 Quints. My husband's a fisherman. My husband is going to move in that day. He's not a veteran, but when we were watching the movie, he was like, oh yeah, I would totally go out and catch the shark. And I was like, okay. Do you have a strong belief that you would actually catch the shark and survive? He's like, well, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I feel like I know these guys. Then the local fishermen go and they catch a tiger shark. The mayor, without any sort of fact checking, declares that the shark hunt is over, that that's the shark. But Hooper doesn't believe it. He said the bite radius doesn't line up. And he tells Chief Brody, he said, you can't, you have, like, this is a real danger.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think we see a great scene, which was one of the, I think, the stronger elements of the film is with Alex. Alex's mother confronts Chief Brody and slaps him. Apparently, this was one of the more painful scenes to shoot just physically, because I think they did 17 takes of this slap for allowing the beach to remain open when Brody knew that this girl had died from a shark attack. And the mayor states that she was wrong for doing that, but Brody knows that she was right and he deserved every bit of that slap because that boy died because of basically his decision to buckle under the pressure of the government.
Right, right.
Hooper then dissects the shark, finding that there's no human remains, the tiger shark, and that the killer shark must be actively still out there. Him and Brody then go out on his very fancy boat at night, and they find the half-sunken boat of Ben Gardner, a local fisherman. Hooper then puts on some scuba gear and dives down, and I think this is one of the more like tension moments of the film. We don't hear the music, but what we hear is silence.
Yeah.
And the sound of water. And he goes out to check the boat. He finds, huge shark bites and a tooth. And then we see the fisherman Gardner's severed head, which was, I think, the big jump scare of the film because I screamed out loud. I had forgotten that happens and scared my poor husky.
Yeah, well, these things happen.
She's now afraid to go in the water.
Yeah. If it makes you feel any better, there was screaming in the theater at the time, and it might have been me.
It was a large jump scare. Mayor Vaughn, they go back to talk to him, and basically because they don't have the evidence of any of the shark tooth or the bite or anything like that, he says, no, he dismisses it, and he refuses to believe that it is like a extremely large great white shark on the beaches, and that they'll only have safety precautions, but the 4th of July festivities and the beaches are going to remain open.
Yeah, and again, you come back to that cross pressure of, the looking out for people in society and, the economy comes back over and over and over and over again and just grows more intense over the course of the film.
Yeah, and we see the shots of just like hundreds and hundreds of people flocking to the beach.
Yeah.
And this like sense of tension of like, oh my God, like these are sitting ducks.
Yeah, brunch.
Who have no idea all the background information because they're being lied to.
Yeah.
And Brody's family's at the beach during this day, and he's observing, and he's too nervous for his son to go out into where the normal beach is. So he tells his son and his friends to go into this kind of, they call it a pond, but it looks like sort of a bay that's beside where they're actually not watching.
Yeah. Well, yeah, which is, again, you think about trying to protect your own children, you're trying to protect young people. And sometimes the guidance you give isn't as accurate as it needs to be. And certainly in the case of that. And I think the audience knows at that point, too, that this is the wrong advice and there's nothing they can do about it, which is incredibly anxiety producing in the audience itself.
Absolutely. We then see sort of a false it's the two kids playing a prank using a shark fin that they've constructed, and it distracts Brody and all the additional security as the real shark swims into the lagoon where where Brody's son and all of his friends are. And then one of the other people in the lagoon is killed, and we see the point of view of the shark going right past Brody's son, who then is dragged to the edge of the beach by his friends as he's in shock and needs to be hospitalized.
Yeah. Which, and again, and then you see the real kind of trauma and stress of Brody at that point about what he's done, but allowing the beach to be open is on full display. It's great.
Another thing that I liked was like Brody's willingness at this point where he's decided that, they're going to reach out to Quint and they're going to catch the shark and he's going to be there. Like the willingness to like, I can't overcome this fear of the ocean for myself, but in order to protect my son and my family, I can kind of do anything, which I think any parent feels.
Yeah. For absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's an excellent point. I mean, that's really the push in a sense he needed to put all of his own stuff behind him in order to get the problem solved.
This is then where, Brody Brody decides he's going to go. He brings Hooper along with him, and they hire Quint, and they are going to go out on this old boat instead of Hooper's fancy boat, and they're going to go and hunt this shark. And we see Quint and Hooper kind of get into it in the way we're talking about this sort of education versus experience.
Yeah. And I think that conflict over the course of the balance of the film is really fascinating to watch. Actually, the two very much, not just types of masculinity, but very much a kind of clash as well, right?
Definitely. And I think it's one of the problems we see in society today is a lack of understanding or lack of appreciation of what the other has to offer. And that with the bringing together at the end of experience and education is actually where we could thrive the best. We need to just try our best to be a little more understanding that another person might have something to offer that you don't.
Absolutely. Open to those other perspectives.
They then hook, they're kind of fishing with this giant reel. They end up hooking the shark, and Quint is giving direction to Hooper, who decides that he is going to strong arm this shark in and snaps the line. And it was interesting because, like I've said to you, I mean, you know, obviously, but the podcast audience, my husband was a fishing guide, and he said that like really masculine men were the worst to guide because they didn't listen to allowing to like play the fish is what they call it, but like allowing the line to run out and then reel it in when the fish was tired, that they were like convinced that they could just reel the fish in strong and they would often snap the lines. And he said, my absolute best clients are always women because they're always open to feedback and they trust that I have experience and they're not like wrestling with this own like internalized masculinity alpha male bullshit. He's like, no. They're like, open to working together on this thing and like much more of like a team player because they're not like battling their own alpha male energy.
Well, we could talk about if the three people on the boat were women, how would the story have played out? But there just weren't enough women on this boat, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, this film does not pass the Bechdel test.
No.
Not even remotely.
Not even remotely. Okay.
The two women, we have two women in the film, three. One dies immediately because she's dumb and goes in the water at night. We've got Brody's wife who only talks to Brody, flirts with his friend, and only discusses her son. And then we also have the other mother whose only conversation with Brody about another man.
Yeah. There we go.
We then see Brody, who's like a little bit pissed off because he's basically like the laborer deckhand of this experience, which he doesn't want to be. And he's laying down some line, and then the shark appears in that iconic shot where he jumps back and says, we're going to need a bigger boat. But they did this when they did the initial like test shooting. The audience had such a big reaction to it that they missed the line. So they had to go back and add another shot of the blood of the chum in the water to extend it back and then have Brody go back into the ship and say it. So the audience didn't miss it. And now I don't know what that ranks on AFI's list of 100 movie quotes, but it's in the top 100.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure it is. For sure it is.
Quint is then estimating that he thinks that the shark's about 25 feet long and probably weighs 3 tons. He then is able to harpoon the shark with a flotation kind of barrel so that they can see it, where the shark disappears under the water. And this reminded me very much of like Peter Pan when we're seeing the shark, comparison to the crocodile, where we're seeing these like little floaties instead of like the ticking alarm clock that's in the crocodile's stomach. It made me think of that. I'm like, I don't know if this is just me, but it really much gave the crocodile vibes of the Captain Hook.
Yeah, it's just you, because I didn't get those at all.
I felt very much that like Quint had this personal vendetta against the shark as Captain Hook does against the crocodile.
Well, I think that's true, and later when we get the story between them when they're drinking, he tells the story of his own experience. You do get that sense. So I think at that level, for sure, you're bang on.
And yeah, and this is his story, which actually just comes next in the plot, is actually based on a real true story from World War II. Of the USS Indianapolis, who was tasked with delivering one of the atomic bombs to Japan and sunk. And because the mission was so secret, there was no distress signal found, and the men were left floating for days and days and days and were subject to shark attacks and weather exposure and saltwater damage to their skin, and were hallucinating and delirious when picked up.
It's a really kind of gripping sequence in the film. And it's what is, as much as anything, listening to the story. I mean, you get some insight then, obviously, into Quint and why he's driven in this way to get the shark. But watching the other characters absorb that story and come to understand Quint in a different way is also really pretty kind of amazing, right? Watching that transformation, people coming to understand other people in a deep way, in a sense, is actually kind of beautiful. And so that moment is really, really very, from my perspective, one of the most profound moments in the whole movie. And I would stack it up to moments in other movies as well as being really high end in terms of the depth of the connection between those three characters. We see
Absolutely.
it a little bit too. You look at Spielberg in A Saving Private Ryan, right? There were moments like that there as well where characters really come to get to know each other in that deeper kind of way. That's very kind of Spielberg.
Yeah, and same with, I think, in The Color Purple, where we see Celie and Shug have this kind of profound moment. It's near, I think it's the middle of the film, where they're talking about Mister, and Shug comes to understand that Celie has this completely different experience from this man, that she's had this, very kind of star-crossed lover relationship where Celie has never had like a consensual experience with him.
Yeah.
And she realizes that Celie is this completely like beaten and broken down character. And she's finally seeing her for the first time and realizing that she's never had an experience. I mean, I'll get into that further because I do think that Spielberg doesn't touch, I think, the nature of that very well, because this then within the book leads to like a lesbian relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't touch on that at all. But it is that same moment where they really see each other for the first time, and this like stark difference in their experience of the same thing.
Yeah. And a double back to your comment more about people needing to slow down and understand each other a little bit differently. That's the moment where Spielberg in this film allows them to do that. And I think the nature of the relationship changes somewhat for the balance of the film.
I'd like to read out the monologue if I could, and I'm not going to do it justice, but I do think it's an important part of the story. Forgive me for my very straightforward reading of something that's supposed to be said by a 55-year-old fisherman and World War II veteran. Okay. Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into our side, Chief. We were coming back from the island of Tinian to light. Just delivered the bomb. Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for half an hour. Tigers, 13-footers. You know how you know when you're in the water, Chief? You can tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was that our bombs mission was so secret, no distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us as overdue for a week. Very first light, Chief, sharks come cruising, so we formed ourselves into tight groups. It was kind of like old squares in battle, like you see in the calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo. And the idea that was the shark comes to the nearest man, and that man starts pounding and hollering and screaming, and sometimes the shark goes away, and sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes that shark looks right into your eyes, and you know the thing about a shark is he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes like doll's eyes, and when he comes at you, it doesn't seem to be living until he bites you, and those black eyes roll over and white then you hear a terrible high-pitched screaming and the ocean turns to red, and in spite of all the pounding and hollering, they come in and they rip you to pieces. By the end of that first dawn, we lost 100 men, and I don't know how many sharks, maybe 1,000. I do know how many men. They averaged 6 an hour. On Thursday morning, Chief, I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robson from Cleveland, a baseball player. I thought he was asleep, and I reached over to wake him up, and he bobbed up and down in the water. He was kind of like on top, upended. Well, he'd been bitten below half the waist. Noon on the 5th day, Mr. Hooper, a Lockheed Ventura saw us. He swung in low, and he saw us, a young pilot, younger than Mr. Hooper here. Anyway, he spotted us, and 3 hours later, a big old fat PBY came down and started to pick us up. That was the first time I was the most frightened, waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. So 1,100 men went into the water. 16 men came out, and the sharks took the rest. June 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. So at the end of this speech, the shark returns. We see the buoys floating in the dark, and the shark hits the bottom of the boat, and the power goes out. And then the Hooper and Quint work through the night trying to repair the engine. Brody's sort of a little bit useless, just kind of standing guard. And he wants to call the Coast Guard, but Quint kind of has gone into this little bit of a mania and rips the like hand radio and smashes it so that he can't. And this is very like, I don't know. This probably they're referencing Moby Dick and not Peter Pan.
I would suggest there may be some Moby Dick references here for sure. But, you know, I mean, I think the process of him going back through that story as well kind of solidifies for him the depth of his desire to get even, right? And so it's calling the Coast Guard in lots of ways represents Brody denying him that opportunity to get even for all of his friends.
And same with his like statement that he'll never wear a life jacket again. He's like, I'm going to die doing
I'd
this.
rather die. Yeah.
And I think that's true of a lot of kind of experiences in life. I think we think that death is the worst option a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Where sometimes either living with like for some people like either living with like the physical trauma of something or the emotional trauma of something.
For sure.
Being death looks like much more of an escape than living with that sort of cross to bear through the rest of your life.
A relative of PTSD, right? For sure.
Yeah, where you're like, do I want to wake up screaming with nightmares for the rest of my life? And we see this a lot with like cops that take their lives. Is I think the same mentality of like, or doctors have super high suicide rates too. With the trauma of lived experience is worse in their minds than actually dying.
For sure. For sure.
And as they're fixing the boat, the shark comes back and Brody has to call them up. Quint then harpoons them with another attached to another barrel. They're trying to then attach the shark to the back of the boat and drag it, and the shark ends up ripping the back of the boat off, and it sort of begins to sink. And the engine then fails sort of as they're trying to drag them back and chase the shark back to where it's a lot more shallow instead of open ocean. And this is where Hooper decides that he is going to use his more educational experience and go down into the cage and try to harpoon the shark from down there with sort of a tranquilizer that will kill it. And this is where Quint sort of, I think, relinquishes like a little bit of his power to say, okay, like, what do you have that can do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And while we're down there, while he's down there, the shark attacks the cage and causes Hooper to drop the spear. And the shark continues to attack him, and Hooper sort of escapes. And this is where we see those great shots of an actual shark.
Yeah, and those really are amazing. And thinking about that within the context of the film, I mean, I was absolutely terrified at the time.
And then the shark and this is where like the mechanical shark does look a little bit fake, but the shark then jumps kind of onto the back of the boat and tips it upended, and Quint slides into the shark's mouth. And this is where we see a lot more of the like gore.
Yeah.
Being chomped in half.
Yeah, and it didn't feel mechanical necessarily at the time when I saw it the first time. It seemed amazing, but when I rewatched it again the other day, the fact that it was called Bruce did occur to me.
This is when Brody decides he's going to throw a scuba tank into the shark's mouth, and his goal is to then shoot it to then get the shark to explode. So he climbs up to the top of the crow's nest and is shooting at the shark, and the shark gets as close as it possibly can when Brody shoots the shark, and it does explode. And then Brody thinks that he's the only one to survive just for when Hooper resurfaces, and then we see them paddle back to shore.
And what I remember being shocked by at the time was that of all the people who were going to solve this problem, I did not actually expect it was going to be Brody. He seemed the least qualified person to solve the shark problem. Yet here we were.
Yeah, it was, and the film just sort of ends. Like usually we have like a little more of a resolution or whatever, but it just, it ends, and like there's no land to be seen when they're paddling, and you're like, no. Do you make it?
Yes.
Because like we have confirmed, like there's other sharks.
Yeah. Yes.
And you're splashing a lot.
I thought it was, again, I mean, it was so different than anything I'd seen before, from the suspense of the shark, the way it was set up, the depth of the characters, and for it to be a summer movie. I mean, it was again, I'm viewing it from the 13-year-old boy lens, right? But it was an amazing thing. And I didn't have any friends who didn't see it more than once. I only saw it the one time, but it was something that people went back to and back to and back to and back to in a way that, I'd seen other movies in the summer that people did not respond to that way. And so it was really kind of a unique experience.
Well, thank you so much for joining me again for this one.
My great pleasure.
I'd love to have you back for when we're going to be doing this. By we, I mean me. I produce and create the show. We'll be doing a Bela Lugosi October. I would like to have you back is for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. It's all Bela Lugosi films all October long.
Absolutely. Let's find a movie that we can get on and just argue about.
I feel like that's going to need to be a Tarantino film.
Okay, I'm in.
Although I've already done 2. I've done my favorites.
Okay, then we'll
We
find
could argue about Django because I know we feel very differently about that film.
I feel very differently about that movie. Yeah.
But I think as I've gotten older, like I think Tarantino and Christopher Nolan are like the entry level film bros for millennials. You're like, when you first discover movies, you're like, oh yeah, Tarantino and Christopher Nolan are like, that's what you like say you like. And it isn't until you like get into like deeper into film, you're like, oh no, I like a Robert Eggers or like even the older ones, like Frank Capra is like my favorite director of like the first generation of directors.
We'll find something.
Yeah, I think Tarantino we can argue over.
Okay. Looking forward.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dad.
You bet.